It started as an ordinary Wednesday morning for Karoline Leavitt. She was in her office, carefully reviewing notes for an upcoming town hall event, when her phone rang. Her communications director, Mark, sounded both excited and apprehensive. "Carolyn, you're not going to believe this. We just got a call from the nation's voice. You know, the most watched political talk show in the country. They want you on tomorrow night's episode." Caroline raised an eyebrow, pausing as she took a sip of her coffee. "Why would they want me? Isn't that show just a liberal echo chamber?" Mark cleared his throat, sounding cautious. "They said it's going to be a debate about religion's role in public life. And you'll be up against Ryan Monroe." Carolyn almost laughed. Ryan Monroe, the Hollywood actor turned activist, was notorious for his scathing remarks on Christianity and conservative values. Just last month, he'd called believers intellectually lazy on social media, sparking outrage among Christian communities. "Let me guess," Caroline said with a smirk. "They think I'm going to be an easy target." Mark hesitated. "Probably. You know how they like to set up their guests. But here's the thing. You've been saying for months that conservatives need to stop avoiding these public battles. This could be your chance to challenge that narrative." Carolyn's eyes narrowed, her competitive spirit kicking in. "Call them back. Tell them I'll be there. And tell them I'm not interested in a pre-screened script." Mark hesitated. "Are you sure? They're known for throwing curveballs. Monroe is ruthless." Caroline straightened her posture, determination hardening her expression. "I'm not scared of Monroe or his rehearsed rhetoric. If they think I'll just roll over, they're in for a surprise." The following day, Caroline stepped into the bustling studio of the nation's voice. The air was thick with the hum of production, cameramen adjusting their angles, sound technicians running last-minute checks, and producers shouting orders. A makeup artist approached her with a powder brush, but Caroline waved her off. She didn't need the studio's glossy perfection. Authenticity had always been her brand. She glanced to her right and saw him, Ryan Monroe. He was casually lounging in one of the plush stage chairs, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, scrolling through his phone. When he finally noticed her, he smirked. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "Didn't know they were bringing in a Bible thumper. Should I keep my arguments simple for you?" Caroline didn't miss a beat. "Keep them as complicated as you like. I'll still call out your hypocrisy." His smile faltered, but before he could respond, the host, Madison Green, swept onto the stage, all dazzling smiles and crisp professionalism. "All right, everyone, we're live in 2 minutes," she announced, guiding both guests to their assigned seats. Carolyn took a moment to look at the audience. As expected, the room was filled with young, progressive-looking individuals. A few faces looked slightly friendlier, probably conservatives who managed to slip in, but most looked like they were there to see Ryan Monroe dominate the debate. The countdown began, and the show's upbeat theme music blared through the speakers. Madison wasted no time. "Good evening, America. Tonight we're tackling a topic that never fails to spark controversy: faith's role in modern politics." Joining us are two dynamic voices from opposite sides of the debate. Representing the conservative Christian perspective, we have political commentator and rising star Karoline Leavitt, and joining us with a secular viewpoint is the outspoken actor and activist Ryan Monroe. Ryan flashed his signature charismatic smile as applause erupted. Caroline remained poised, giving a respectful nod to the audience. Madison leaned forward with her usual charm. "Caroline, let's start with you. Do you believe faith still has a place in public policy?" Caroline's voice was calm, her tone confident. "Absolutely. Faith is not just a private belief. It's an integral part of our culture and values. It has shaped America's moral compass for centuries. Separation of church and state doesn't mean eliminating faith from public life. It means ensuring that no single religion dominates government. Faith can coexist with governance without compromising individual freedoms." Madison turned to Ryan, whose smile had taken on a sharper edge. "Your thoughts?" Ryan adjusted his suit, leaning back as if bored. "Look, I respect people's right to believe whatever they want, but we can't base public policy on myths and ancient stories. We're in the 21st century. Science and rational thought should lead the way, not archaic doctrines that discriminate and divide." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience, but Caroline didn't flinch. She leaned forward, meeting Ryan's gaze. You speak of discrimination, but isn't it discriminatory to dismiss millions of Americans as ignorant because they find strength and purpose through faith? History is full of brilliant minds who balanced faith and reason. Your generalization is both inaccurate and arrogant. Ryan's smug expression wavered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. What's arrogant is thinking your personal beliefs should dictate laws for everyone else. We live in a pluralistic society, Karoline. Religion belongs in churches, not in policy decisions. Karoline's reply was immediate. But what about moral frameworks? Our laws are rooted in moral principles that often align with religious teachings. Banning faith from the public square doesn't make us more progressive. It just makes us morally adrift. Madison interjected, clearly relishing the tension. Some say that imposing religious morality infringes on personal freedoms. Karoline, how do you respond to that? Karoline didn't hesitate. Freedom doesn't mean erasing foundational values. It means allowing different beliefs to coexist. But erasing faith from the public sphere entirely? That's not freedom. That's censorship. The debate was heating up, and Madison announced a commercial break. As the cameras cut, Ryan leaned in closer. You're good, I'll give you that. But good luck convincing this crowd. Karoline smiled back. I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to remind people that faith isn't a weakness. It's a choice and a right. Ryan looked momentarily unsettled, but before he could respond, the stage manager signaled for the next segment. Karoline knew the battle was just beginning, but she wasn't about to back down. As the commercial break ended, the tension in the studio was palpable. Karoline glanced briefly at the audience, most of whom seemed firmly on Ryan Monroe's side. She could sense their eagerness to see her stumble, to watch Monroe dominate the conversation with his sharp rhetoric and celebrity charm. Madison Green adjusted her notes as the cameras rolled back on. Welcome back to The Nation's Voice. Before the break, we heard some compelling arguments from both sides. Now let's dive deeper into the implications of intertwining faith and politics. Madison turned towards Ryan, her polished voice hinting at controversy. Ryan, you've been very vocal about the dangers of allowing religious values to shape public policy. Can you elaborate on why you believe it's so harmful? Ryan leaned forward, flashing his confident smile. Sure, the problem with mixing religion and politics is that it creates a slippery slope towards discrimination. We've seen it time and again, religious beliefs being used as a weapon to restrict rights. Gay marriage, reproductive rights, even public education. Religion has been used to justify outdated policies that harm marginalized groups. The audience erupted in applause, nodding in agreement. Ryan's gaze flickered briefly to Karoline, gauging her reaction. Karoline kept her expression calm and composed. When Madison shifted the focus back to her, she didn't hesitate. Ryan, your argument hinges on a fundamental misunderstanding. The issue isn't religion itself, but how individuals misuse it to push personal agendas. Faith, at its core, is about guiding personal morals, not enforcing dogma. Laws rooted in moral principles aren't inherently religious. They're about preserving human dignity. You can't dismiss moral foundations just because they align with religious teachings. Ryan scoffed, leaning back casually. But that's just it, Karoline. Morality is subjective. What you see as moral might be oppressive to someone else. When religion dictates law, it's not about morals. It's about control. Karoline's eyes flashed with determination. And when secularism dictates law, it often strips away moral accountability altogether. You want a world where no one's beliefs guide their decisions, but that's impossible. Everyone, religious or not, operates from a belief system. Are we to ban any viewpoint rooted in faith because it makes some uncomfortable? Madison interjected, sensing the escalating tension. Ryan, Karoline brings up an interesting point about belief systems. Isn't it fair to say that secularism can become just as dogmatic when it refuses to acknowledge religious perspectives? Ryan waved his hand dismissively. That's a false equivalence. Secularism isn't about dogma. It's about inclusivity. Religious laws exclude people who don't share those beliefs. When you legislate based on faith, you inherently alienate those who don't subscribe to it. Karoline raised a hand to respond, her tone unwavering. Inclusivity shouldn't mean erasing values. You criticize religious morals as divisive, but progressive ideology can be just as exclusionary. I'm not saying religion should dictate policy, but it should inform the values behind it. Otherwise, we end up with moral relativism, where nothing is inherently right or wrong, and the loudest voices set the rules. The audience seemed momentarily unsure, some nodding in reluctant agreement, while others murmured disapproval. Madison pressed on. Caroline, you often speak about America's moral foundations. Do you believe the founding principles were inherently religious? Caroline nodded confidently. Absolutely. The founding fathers spoke explicitly about God-given rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These weren't granted by the government. They were inherent, protected by a higher moral standard. To dismiss that as mere historical coincidence ignores the philosophical roots of our freedoms. Ryan interjected, but that was over 200 years ago. Are we really going to base modern policies on outdated notions? The world has changed, Caroline. Science and progress should dictate how we move forward, not ancient texts. Caroline didn't back down. Science and progress don't negate morality. We can advance technologically without discarding our ethical foundation. What worries me is this new form of secular authoritarianism, where people of faith are mocked, marginalized, and told to stay silent. That's not progress. It's intolerance. The crowd seemed taken aback by her pointed remark. Even Madison appeared momentarily unsure of how to steer the conversation. Ryan, however, couldn't let it go. Secular authoritarianism? Give me a break. You're just mad because fewer people want politicians quoting the Bible when making laws. Times are changing, Caroline. Maybe you should too. Caroline smiled calmly, her voice firm. I'm not against change. I'm against erasing foundational truths in the name of progress. Tolerance goes both ways. You can't preach inclusion while ostracizing millions of Americans simply because their faith shapes their values. Madison sensed the gravity of Caroline's words and jumped in to steer the debate. Let's pivot to a real-world example. Ryan, recently, a high school in Texas, was criticized for allowing prayer before a football game. You publicly denounced it as state-sponsored indoctrination. Why? Ryan scoffed. Because it was. Kids shouldn't feel pressured to participate in religious practices at a public school. It's coercion, plain and simple. Caroline couldn't hold back. Coercion or expression? Those students weren't forced. They volunteered. Banning prayer because some might feel uncomfortable is the opposite of inclusion. It's silencing faith out of fear of controversy. The crowd was quieter now, clearly grappling with the complexity of the issue. Ryan's bravado seemed slightly shaken, but he kept pushing. Schools are for education, not worship. If people want to pray, they can do it at home or church. Caroline responded steadily. So, public spaces are only for secular expression? That's not neutrality. That's imposing a worldview where faith is inherently unwelcome. Freedom of religion doesn't mean freedom from religion. Madison leaned forward, realizing the depth of the clash. This debate is clearly touching a nerve with our audience. We're going to take another break. Stay with us for more of this heated discussion. As the cameras cut again, Ryan leaned closer, his voice low. You're not winning this. They brought you here to be humiliated. Caroline met his gaze without wavering. I'm not here to win your approval. I'm here to speak for those who feel silenced. You can mock all you want, but the truth doesn't change. Ryan glared, clearly frustrated by her resolve. The crew moved to reset the stage, and Caroline took a deep breath. She knew she was challenging not just Ryan, but the entire ideological framework he represented. The next segment would be the toughest yet, but Caroline wasn't backing down. She was here for a reason, and she intended to see it through, no matter the quantum. As the final commercial break ended, the atmosphere in the studio grew even tenser. The debate had clearly polarized the audience, with some looking visibly moved by Caroline's passionate defense of faith, while others seemed staunchly supportive of Ryan's progressive stance. Madison Green, sensing the high stakes, spoke directly to the camera with a serious tone. Welcome back to the nation's voice. Tonight, we're witnessing a fiery debate between conservative commentator Karoline Leavitt and celebrity activist Ryan Monroe. The topic, should faith have a place in public policy? She turned to Caroline, her tone slightly more inquisitive this time. Caroline, earlier you mentioned that secularism can become authoritarian when it silences faith. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Caroline nodded, her gaze steady and confident. Absolutely. We see it all the time now. People of faith being publicly shamed for expressing their beliefs. Whether it's a baker who refuses to make a cake that contradicts his faith, or a teacher who mentions prayer in a personal context, they are vilified. The message is clear. Faith is fine as long as you keep it hidden. That's not religious freedom. That's suppression. Ryan scoffed audibly. Oh, come on, Caroline. Nobody is being suppressed. They're just being held accountable for pushing their beliefs onto others. There's a difference between practicing your religion and using it to justify discrimination. Caroline didn't hesitate. And there's a difference between holding firm to personal convictions and being forced to abandon them for the sake of political correctness. We're not talking about hate or discrimination here. We're talking about conscience. When did it become acceptable to demand that people violate their core beliefs to fit a shifting moral narrative? The audience stirred, clearly conflicted. Madison noticed the energy shift and decided to turn up the heat. Ryan, let's address that. Are we, as a society, pushing too hard to eliminate public expressions of faith? Ryan shot Caroline a smug glance before answering. What we're doing is making sure public spaces remain neutral. When someone's personal beliefs dictate what others can or can't do, that's not freedom. It's tyranny wrapped in faith. Caroline raised her eyebrows. But neutrality doesn't mean erasing religious expression altogether. When secularism demands that faith be entirely removed from public life, it's no longer neutral. It's anti-religious. You can't advocate for inclusivity while systematically excluding faith. Ryan's frustration was becoming evident. But you don't see the damage done by forcing religious practices into public institutions? Not everyone believes in your God, Caroline. Why should they be subjected to your traditions? Caroline's voice remained calm but firm. No one's forcing anything. Allowing voluntary expressions of faith isn't coercion. If a group of students wants to pray before a football game, banning them isn't protecting freedom. It's denying it. Secularism should coexist with faith, not crush it. Madison leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. Caroline, are you suggesting that secular policies are inherently biased against faith? Caroline nodded without hesitation. Yes, we've shifted from a culture of religious tolerance to one where faith is labeled as backward or oppressive. People who openly practice their religion are mocked, dismissed, or treated like intellectual inferiors. That's not progress, that's prejudice. Ryan interjected. It's not prejudice to expect public spaces to be free from religious influence. You're free to worship at home or in your church. Just don't bring it into my schools or my government. Caroline shot him a sharp look. But public spaces belong to everyone, including believers. Your stance essentially tells millions of Americans that their faith is inherently unwelcome in shared environments. That's exclusion, not freedom. Madison, sensing the debate had reached its peak, posed a final question. If you both had to offer one takeaway for our viewers tonight, what would it be? Ryan answered first, his voice full of conviction. We need to separate belief from governance. Religion belongs in private life, not in public policy. We should be moving forward, not clinging to outdated traditions that divide us. Caroline took a deep breath before speaking, her eyes unwavering. My takeaway is simple. Faith has guided countless people through hardships, inspired communities, and shaped moral foundations. Erasing it from public life doesn't make us more inclusive. It makes us poorer in spirit. We must defend the right to live out our beliefs, not just in private, but as an integral part of who we are. The studio was silent for a moment, the gravity of her words hanging in the air. Even Madison seemed momentarily lost for words.